Hi and welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to create pivot tables using LibreOffice Calc. So the first thing we'll do is look at LibreOffice Calc spreadsheet. You can follow the same logic of this tutorial using OpenOffice Calc, and it's very similar with Microsoft Office Excel, but I'm going to do a separate tutorial on that at a later date. So let's open up LibreOffice Calc. And we've got a blank spreadsheet here, and like usual I'm going to save my document. Just going to give it a new name here. And in order to create pivot tables we need some data to work with. So what I'll do is just copy some information into here. So we've got some data in this spreadsheet, and let's just zoom in a bit so you can see it a bit easier. Okay. So this spreadsheet I will also upload to my blog, so you can actually download and follow this tutorial using the exact same spreadsheet I'm using today. If you check the link in the YouTube description, I'll put a link there to this particular spreadsheet where you can download it. So if you want to use the exact same data in this tutorial, you can do that, or you can create your own data as well. So let's look at this information and understand what it is before we create the pivot table. So across the top we've got these columns, and here is, in fact the first thing we should do is name this sheet. It's called sheet 1, it doesn't really mean anything, so we're going to call this weekly sales. So now this spreadsheet means something. We've labelled it and it's called weekly sales, so we kind of understand what this is all about now. So we've got a date here, we've got a seller ID, so this will be a salesperson, we could say, in a business. We've got a customer ID, so every time a customer buys a product from us, we give them a unique ID. There's a unique transaction ID, there's a unique product ID, and there's the product price. So if we look at this information, it's showing us basically 1 week's worth of information. It starts on the 1st and it finishes on the 7th or the 10th. So that represents 1 week's worth of data. And if we look at these first 3 rows, we can see on the 1st or the 10th, this person called seller, or seller ID 1 in the business, sold to a customer with ID number 12, and it was the first transaction, and they sold 3 products, and this is the product price. And on that same day, the seller with ID number 2, the salesperson, sold to customer with ID number 14, and there's 2 transaction IDs here, and these are the products that were sold, and this is the product price. And the reason there's 2 transaction IDs here is that this person may have sold a product to this customer in the morning, and then that customer came back and bought a product in the afternoon. So it has 2 unique transaction IDs, whereas this was 1 transaction that happened all at the same time. So we want to create some pivot tables to help us analyze this information. That's what pivot tables are all about. It's about analyzing the information and understanding what happened during this week, or if you had more data, what happened during the month or the whole year. So let's create one pivot table first, a basic one, and we want to select all the information in this spreadsheet. To do that quickly, in between rows 1 and A, there's this little blank box right here where my mouse is. If we click on that, it will highlight the whole spreadsheet. And we want to go to data, and we want to go to pivot table and create a pivot table. So, and it says here, selection, create the pivot table based on the current selection, which is correct. We'll click OK. So we see this information pop up this screen. And as default, when you create a pivot table, it's going to have the word data in here. I'll explain that a little bit later, but it's been selected, it's highlighted blue. We're going to click on it and press the delete key to delete this data. We don't want this here. We'll come back and look at that later. So the first pivot table that we want to create is one based on how many products were sold, the total value on a given date. So here we're going to select this date here, we're going to left click on it and drag and drop it into here. and we'll also take the product price and we're going to drag and drop it here. And we make sure it says sum here. If it doesn't, then you need to double click on there and make sure you select sum here. And click OK, and then click OK again. And when we do that, it's going to create this new sheet here, a new tab. And what we want to do here is relabel that to, we're going to double click and we'll get rid of this word pivot table and we'll type in here weekly sales. So really we want to say that this is actually daily sales. That's really what it is. And we'll click OK. So what this pivot table shows us basically is the date and how many sales were or the total value of all of the sales on that particular day. We can do that another way using auto filters here, but with a few mouse clicks we can get that same information here. So it's much quicker to use a pivot table. So we see the different dates and we can see the grand total for that particular day, and then we can see the total amount for the whole week. This is quite a basic pivot table, but it allows us to quickly analyze how much sales we've done on each day and the grand total for the week very quickly. So this is a nice pivot table to generate. So let's go back to the weekly sales tab here, and we're going to select the whole spreadsheet again, and we're going to go to data, pivot table, and create. And we're going to create another basic pivot table. And this time we're going to drag let's get rid of this data again. We'll delete this, and we'll drag the seller ID in here, and we'll drag the product price in here. And it still says sum, so it's correct, and we'll click OK. And this time this pivot table is telling us the seller, so these are all unique people 1 to 5, and how much they've sold for the whole week. So that's another nice pivot table that you can quickly generate. These are just basic pivot tables. We're going to create a more advanced one in a moment. So here we can see two pivot tables, and we should label this one as well, and we call it the seller's total sales. So each seller, how much did they sell in total for the whole week, and it also gives us the grand total for the end of the week as well. And this total should be exactly the same as the daily sales one here. Exactly the same. So now we've got two pivot tables. One that shows us how much sales we've done on a particular day, and another one that shows us how much each seller has sold in the whole week. So let's create another pivot table. This one's going to be a lot more complicated. So we're going to select all of the table. We're going to go to data, pivot table, and create. And we're going to click OK. And in this one we're going to leave data here. And what we're going to do is drag in the date, the seller ID, the customer's ID, the transaction, and the product ID, and we'll also drag in the product price here, and we're going to click OK. What we'll do is select up here in the top corner to select the whole spreadsheet, and double click in between columns A and B, and that's just going to stretch out the spreadsheet and make sure we can see the titles and the headers in here a bit more clearly. So this pivot table is much more complicated, but it's actually breaking down a lot of useful information for us. So if we look at the first day, the 1st of the 10th, what it's showing us is the seller ID. So sales agent number 1, he sold to customer ID number 12, so he sold to this person. This is the transaction ID, so it was one unique transaction, and he sold these 3 products, and these are the price of the products. So that's quite interesting information, and we can see on that same day, sales agent with ID number 2 sold to a customer with ID number 14, but he sold 2 unique transactions. Can you see what transaction ID number 2 and number 3? So he did 2 different sales to that person on the same day. He may have sold in the morning and in the afternoon, and he sold these 2 products. Now we can go down the spreadsheet and we can see on the second day, sales agent ID number 1, the same seller as in the first day, was also working, and he sold to customer with ID number 17, and it was the 6th transaction ID, and he sold these 3 products. And we can see on that same day, a new sales agent with ID number 3 sold to customer 15 and 16, and he sold transactions 4 and 5, and he sold 3 products in that transaction and 1 in this one. So I hope that makes sense. It's quite interesting to see the information in this view. It's almost breaking it down by the day, and then breaking it down by the seller, and also what customers they sold to, and each transaction ID, and what products were sold in those transaction IDs, and what was the value of those products for each transaction. So it's quite interesting to see the information this way. But here's something interesting you can do. What you can do now is click on this drop down menu, and you can tick this box to say unselect everything, and you can select ID number 1 here and click OK. And now the data is only showing you the transactions that were generated by this particular seller. So he sold on the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 5th, and the 7th. So he wasn't working on the 6th, and he wasn't working on the on the 3rd. But now we can get a breakdown, and we can see the grand total here, 1,110. So if we were to go to our seller total here, we can see that seller ID 1 should have sold 1,110. So we can see that same information in this pivot table. We can see that same information here by selecting from the drop down seller ID number 1. Let's try number 3 for example. So sales agent with ID number 3, we click OK, and we can see that he sold products on the 2nd, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th, and he made 1,585 in sales. And we go to here, and we can see seller ID 3 made 1,885 in sales. So this pivot table allows us to filter out a lot of different types of data sets and information. So here we can select them all again. So we select all of our sales agents here, and we'll click OK, and it will take us back to the original spreadsheet with all of the information. And we can do something else in here. We can go to customer ID, and we can select, for example, let's select customer ID 12 and click OK. So we can see customer ID 12 came to the business and he bought on the 1st, the 4th, and the 6th. And we can see that that customer purchased £905 worth of products. And we can not only see that, but we can see what products he actually purchased here. These are the product IDs, and these are the totals of each product that he purchased. And we can see the transaction IDs, and we can also see which sellers or sales agents sold to him on those particular days. So that's really useful information for us. As a business, that's quite useful. We can see trends here now. We can see which customers are purchasing what types of products, and we can see who's selling those products to those customers, and we can see which days that customers come into our business. We can select them all again here, and we can do another filter. So we can go to here and we can select product ID, the first product ID, and we can click OK, and we can now see how many times that product was sold on a given day, and which days that product was sold on, which sellers or sales agents sold that product, and how much was the grand total. And it was 1,950 for that product ID 1. So that's quite interesting to see that information as well. We can start to see a specific product, how many times it was sold, and which customers actually bought that particular product as well. So you can see the power of pivot tables now, and you could in theory gather that same information from this one table, but it would take you a long time to analyze all of that information. You'll have to do it step by step for each transaction or each product or each customer or each sales agent or on each day. It would take you a long time to gather all that information, but by using this pivot table we can see all of that information in a grand overview, a total overview for the week. So really we should label this sheet here It's called pivot table weekly sales, but really it's our weekly overview. So here's 3 examples of different pivot tables. We have one which shows us the total sales for a specific seller or sales agent. We have one table here that shows us the total sales on a given day. We could create another one here actually, so let's go back to weekly sales, our main spreadsheet. We'll select it all again and we'll do one more. We'll go to pivot table, create, and in this example let's say we want to see the product ID here and the product price here, and we'll delete this data from here. We'll click OK, and what this table is showing us is the unique product and the total amount of sales, the total value of sales for that particular product. So if we look down the table, we can say that product ID 109 did the minimum amount of sales and product ID 101 did the most amount of sales. So that must be a popular product or it's at a high value, one or the other. So that's another useful piece of information, and this is, we'll call this our total product sales. So now we've got different pivot tables. For me, the most useful one would be the weekly overview. That's the one that I would probably use more than often, but it's nice having these smaller pivot tables just to examine information quickly, so you can see how many sellers or how much is the total sales for each sales agent, how much have you sold on each particular day, which products are selling the most or which is giving you the most revenue, and you can see a grand overview as well, and you can filter from that grand overview. So we can just have a quick look and see how much sales has sales agent number 4 done, and he sold on the 3rd and the 6th, and he sold these customers. He did 2 transactions on this day, and he did 1 transaction on this day, and this is the total amount he sold, £605, seller ID 4, seller ID 4, £605. Okay, so I hope you can see the power of pivot tables. These are just some basic examples of how to use pivot tables. There's many other ways to do that. You can even go ahead and create graphs and tables from this information as well. So you could take the sellers and you could take this information, create on charts, insert a chart, and you can select different types of charts. So you could select a pie chart, for example, or we'll stick with a column chart, and we'll just make a basic one and finish it. We'll shrink this down a little bit. Then based on this pivot table, we can look at the sellers and see how much transactions they're doing or what data they're selling, what value of products they're selling here in this table. We can see that, and we can see sales agent 5 just by visually checking that he's done the least amount of transactions, and sales agent 3 has done the most. So that's a nice way of looking at a table of this information, like a chart. I'm going to delete this chart. And you can create charts on all of these different sales. You can do one on the daily sales as well. We could create another chart here. Maybe we'll create a pie chart this time, and then this time we can see the biggest slice goes to the green, and the green was the 4th. And we look at, let's go back here. If we look at this table, on the 4th we did the most amount of sales, so we can see that it's taken the most amount of the pie chart. Okay, so there's not much else to show you. I'm going to do a more advanced tutorial on pivot tables at a later date. this is just a basic understanding of how to do this. These columns and this information can be any types of information in here. It doesn't have to even be related to business. It could be how much of could be any type of information, as long as you've got columns that are consistent and rows of data that are represented maybe by date, or it could be weekly sales, it could be monthly, it could be yearly, it can be all sorts of information either about your business or even on a personal level. It could be to do with your mortgage payments, or how much you're spending on your holidays, or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. As long as the information can be gathered in this type of format, you can create pivot tables on that information and get some useful data out of it. So I hope you find this tutorial useful. That's the ending of this particular tutorial. I'll create a more advanced one at a later date, and I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.